Have you ever wondered why the US dollar is everywhere? From your local currency exchange to the biggest international deals, the dollar is king. But how did this happen? How did a single country's currency come to dominate the entire global economy? It's a fascinating story of power, strategy, and a little bit of luck. Let's rewind the clock and uncover how the dollar conquered the world. Our story begins in the ashes of World War II. In 1944, with much of the world in ruins, leaders from 44 Allied nations gathered in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. Their goal was to create a new, stable international economic order to prevent the kind of chaos that had led to 2 world wars. The United States, which had been spared the devastation of the war on its own soil, was in an incredibly powerful position. Its industries were booming, and it held a staggering amount of the world's gold. Nearly 70% of the total supply was sitting in American vaults. This gave the U.S. immense leverage. At the Bretton Woods Conference, they made a groundbreaking proposal. They promised that the U.S. dollar would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Other countries could then peg their own currencies to the U.S. dollar. This created a system where the dollar was, quite literally, as good as gold. For a world desperate for stability, this was an irresistible offer. It provided a reliable foundation upon which to rebuild. The U.S. dollar became the world's primary reserve currency, the anchor for the entire global financial system. But it wasn't just about gold. The U.S. also launched the Marshall Plan, a massive aid program to help rebuild war-torn Europe. This wasn't just an act of charity. It was a brilliant strategic move. The aid was provided in dollars, which meant European countries needed to use dollars to buy American goods and machinery for their reconstruction. This flooded Europe with dollars, further entrenching the currency in international trade and cementing its role as the go-to medium of exchange. The Marshall Plan not only rebuilt Europe, but also created strong, lasting economic ties with the United States, all centered around the dollar. This gold-backed system worked well for about 25 years. But by the late 1960s, things started to get shaky. The U.S. was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and domestic social programs, printing more money to cover the costs. Other countries, seeing the increasing number of dollars in circulation, started getting nervous. They began to worry that the U.S. didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars it was printing. Nations like France started demanding their gold back in exchange for the dollars they held. This led to a significant drain on U.S. gold reserves. The breaking point came in 1971. President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement that would change the world economy forever. He unilaterally canceled the direct convertibility of the U.S. dollar to gold. This event, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system. Suddenly, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by, well, nothing but the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. You might think this would have been the end of the dollar's dominance. But what happened next was a stroke of geopolitical genius. With the gold standard gone, the U.S. needed a new way to prop up global demand for its currency. They found the answer in oil. In the early 1970s, the U.S. struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer and the most influential member of OPEC. The agreement was simple. The U.S. would provide military protection and support to Saudi Arabia, and in return, Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. They also agreed to invest their surplus oil profits back into U.S. government bonds. Other OPEC countries quickly followed suit. This created the petrodollar system. Since every country needs oil, every country now needed US dollars to buy it. This generated a massive, constant, and artificial demand for dollars, completely independent of the health of the U.S. economy itself. Whether a country was an ally or a rival of the U.S., if it wanted to power its cities and fuel its cars, it had to acquire dollars first. This masterstroke ensured the dollar's reign continued long after its connection to gold was severed. With a massive GDP, it's the biggest consumer market on the planet. Companies everywhere want to sell their products to American consumers, and these transactions are overwhelmingly done in dollars. U.S. corporations are global giants conducting business all over the world, further spreading the use of the dollar. The sheer scale of the U.S. economy makes the dollar a natural choice for international business. And you can't talk about the dollar's power without mentioning the power of the U.S. military. The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. This unparalleled military might ensures the stability of global trade routes and protects U.S. interests and allies around the world. This security umbrella gives countries confidence that the political and economic system underpinning the dollar is secure. It is a stark reminder that economic power and military power are often two sides of the same coin. Then there's the power of America's financial system. Wall Street is the undisputed center of global finance. The U.S. has the deepest, most liquid, and most sophisticated financial markets in the world. When a company or a country wants to raise large amounts of capital, they often turn to U.S. banks and markets, U.S. Treasury bonds, which are essentially loans to the U.S. government, are considered the safest financial asset in the world. During times of global uncertainty, investors and central banks rush to buy these bonds, which further increases demand for dollars. This brings us to the final and perhaps most important factor, trust. Despite its challenges, the world largely trusts the United States to manage its currency responsibly. The U.S. has a stable political system, a strong rule of law, and an independent central bank, the Federal Reserve. This creates a sense of predictability and security that few other countries can match. When a global crisis hits, whether it's a financial meltdown or a pandemic, investors flee to the safety of the dollar. It's the world's ultimate safe haven asset. The dollar isn't just a currency. It's a symbol of stability in a turbulent world. So, from the ashes of World War II and the promise of gold, to the clever creation of the petrodollar and the unmatched might of its economy and military, the U.S. dollar's dominance is no accident. It's the result of decades of strategic planning, economic power, and the establishment of global trust. While other currencies like the euro and the Chinese yuan are rising, dethroning the king will be an incredibly difficult task. The dollar's network effects are just too powerful. For the foreseeable future, we will continue to live in a world ruled by the dollar. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this explanation interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into how our world works. See you in the next video.